Welcome, fellow horror hounds, and welcome to the latest episode of Talk and Stalk, your own holy home for horror. I'm your host, as always, Barry, and today's podcast is really just going to be me talking about some of my all-time favourite opening kills in horror movies. Now, some of the kills on this list do actually occur in the opening scene and very much set the tone for the movie to follow. There's actually some kills on this list. While they're not actually in the opening scene of the movie, they are actually the first kill of the film. All of these kills, needless to say, I really like. There are loads of great kills in horror movies. So I'm just going to try and keep this list kind of short and sweet. If this podcast proves to be successful and have enough listeners, then maybe I'll actually follow it up with a companion podcast covering some more kills. So yeah, I'm just going to jump into this list now. They're not really in any specific order, but all I will say is this. The last scene that I do talk about on here is my all-time favourite kill in horror movies. So, yeah, okay. Well, the first film on this list, it is very much a sci-fi horror film. It is essentially a slasher film in space. It's actually Kane's death via the chestburster in 1979's Alien. Completely unexpected. I mean, this is certainly an iconic scene, probably one of the most iconic scenes in the history of horror. And to actually capture a genuine reaction from the rest of the cast, obviously the crew and John Hurt himself actually knew this was going to happen. Tom Skerritt, Sigourney Weaver, Yaphet Kotto, and Veronica Cartwright had no idea what was going to happen. They knew something was going to happen, and it's actually a genuine reaction caught on camera. This scene is just... I mean, I can't imagine what it would have been like back in 79, seeing it on the big screen. It's become an incredibly famous moment, and obviously it gave us the Xenomorph, in my opinion, one of the greatest horror creations in all of cinema, courtesy of H.R. Geiger. And it really kind of sets this film up as to what kind of movie this is going to be. I think Alien is a great sci-fi horror classic. So yeah, the chestburster scene with John Hurt, who, funnily enough, in a great little nod to it, in Spaceballs, released in 87, near the end of the movie, the chestburster comes out again, I think in one of the film's highlights, and he actually looks at it and says, "Oh no, not again." Just a great little nod, a great little parody of that chestburster scene. Now, one of the other deaths that I'm going to talk about briefly is the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Kurt's death, obviously released in 74. I think it's, again, really the unexpectedness of it. It comes out of nowhere. The character Kurt, walks into a house. They can't find anyone. He hears a squeal. He trips, and Leatherface just comes out of nowhere and smashes him across the head with a sledgehammer, and then proceeds to smash him, I think, 2 more times. It's just, I'd imagine this completely and utterly shocked people back in 74. It's a death that caused quite an impact. And then, of course, he drags the body and just slides that shutter door over. We don't really see anything beyond that. It's literally just Leatherface appearing out of nowhere, quick, smash across the head, a couple of more smashes, and then the shutting. It's such a simple scene, and yet highly effective. And, that is obviously our first glimpse, our very first look at Leatherface, who obviously is one of the most iconic villains in the history of horror movies. It's just a great, very quick, it's very abrupt, but a very kind of visceral scene. It is actually followed up by, not too long afterwards, another scene that is very notable. A great scene that maybe I'll save for a future podcast. Now, another scene here is, again, this is possibly my favourite death in the entire Nightmare on Elm Street franchise. I'd really be torn between this and Glenn's death. Glenn, of course, being Johnny Depp in the original Nightmare. But this is actually the first kill of the movie. So Glenn's death can't be counted here. And that's Tina's death in Nightmare on Elm Street. This is a scene that's pretty impactful and certainly sets up the tone for the film. Obviously, Tina goes to sleep. What I love about Nightmare on Elm Street, it very much, blurs the lines between fantasy and reality. Are they awake or are they in the dream world here? And of course, we get our first glimpse at Freddy Krueger, like our first proper introductory glimpse. And, you get them lines like, "Hey, Tina, watch this," and he cuts his finger off. There's a kind of gleeful sadism to Freddy Krueger. This is back when Freddy Krueger was actually quite scary. I mean, there's certainly some goofy moments here and there in that. And then obviously, the pretty iconic scene actually for fans of the franchise is where he's walking towards her, and his arms are extending, and scraping the walls. And Tina says, "Please, God," and I love Freddy Krueger's line here, "This is God." And he proceeds to chase her. And, of course, we see this death from, his name is actually escaping me at the moment, her boyfriend, Rod, that she's actually, she's under the covers, she's struggling with Freddy Krueger, and she just gets sliced. And then obviously dragged up, and she's dragged up the wall. It's an incredibly well shot scene actually, because it was done with a revolving room, and it's a great effect that really kind of holds up well now. She's butchered. She's slashed. You see these huge claw marks, and then she's dragged up. She's obviously writhing and struggling up to the ceiling, and then obviously she drops down dead. It's a great death. And obviously, the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise veered more into comedy as the franchise went on. Freddy Krueger became obviously a lot more comedic, clearly became the star of the show. But this death, there's nothing really, aside from maybe the little moment where she, pulls his face off and he's got kind of a laughing skull face underneath and that. This is a really kind of like pretty hardcore scene, pretty hardcore moment. It's a great death. Now, one of the other opening kills here is that belongs to a creature feature, Jaws. I don't actually recall the girl's name, released in 1975. This is actually the first movie to ever be classified as a blockbuster. Jaws was a huge box office success. I believe in today's money, it made well over $1 billion. I believe about $1.3 billion. In a way, it gave great white sharks a bad rap. It certainly kind of brought horror to the masses, horror firmly into the mainstream. The opening to this movie, though, is just pretty damn terrifying. It's clearly it's the screams of the girl. The screams. It's really is impactful. And obviously, this scene very much kind of set the tone for this movie. And, this film obviously firmly put Steven Spielberg on the Hollywood map. I mean, he directed Duel a few years prior. But, the scene, this obviously film put a lot of people actually off going into the water. I do actually recall reading that a lot less people were going to the beach and going into the water because of Jaws. The opening scene is just great. She's obviously being pulled about left, right, and centre, and obviously dragged down into the water. And it's the fact that you don't actually see anything. You don't see the shark. I know originally that Spielberg obviously had intended the audience to see the shark a lot more than what they did. But, due to the mechanical shark Bruce, which they actually nicknamed it, constantly malfunctioning, it just wasn't made possible. But I actually think that works in the film's favour. I'm a less is more kind of person, and the fact that you see very little of the shark until the end of the film really makes this become kind of a masterclass in suspense. Great opening. Okay, the next film would be now. This is a film that essentially revived the slasher genre in the 90s. I'm a huge fan of this film, as I'm sure most people know. Scream, Casey Becker, Drew Barrymore's characters. Obviously, her boyfriend is killed shortly before her. She's gutted. It's the whole scene. It's the whole 10-minute scene of this, which is very much obviously a nod, a homage to 1979's When a Stranger Calls. There's a real sense of menace. I love the film references that is made. Obviously the killer, terrorizing her over the telephone, and it's incredibly well written. Scream boasts a great screenplay by Kevin Williamson, who clearly has an ardent love for the subgenre. Just lines like, the real moment that gets alarm bells ringing is where, the killer Ghostface, says, you never told me your name. And she's, why do you want to know my name? Because I want to know who I'm looking at. What did you say? I want to know who I'm talking to. Just that moment. If you hang up on me again, I'll gut you like a fish. Who's there? You should never say who's there. Don't you watch scary movies? It's a death wish. You might as well come out here to investigate a strange noise or something. I just love the interaction over the telephone between these two characters. Obviously we get Halloween mentioned, Nightmare on Elm Street, Friday the 13th mentioned. It really is. Obviously, as the franchise went on, now the original Scream is very clever. It's a film that certainly makes a lot of nods. It makes a lot of Easter eggs and references, for fans of the genre. As the franchise went on, it started to become a lot more meta. Sometimes maybe a little too meta for its own good at times. But with the first Scream, even though the references were there, the nods were there was an air of menace to it. And the opening to the first Scream did a great job of just setting the entire tone of that film. Seeing Casey Becker's, it really is quite harrowing. The moment where her parents come home and her mother screams, and it's the music as well that accompanies the scene. It's just great. Seeing Casey Becker's lifeless body there hanging from the tree, which is clearly a nod, I believe, to Suspiria. My favourite Argento film, personally, released in 1977. It's clearly a nod, a homage to that. So it's that whole kind of that cat and mouse kind of game on the telephone in the house. It's just great, as I said, so well written by Williamson. Scream 2 also had a great opening as well. I wanted to try and veer away from sequels though for this list, but I really did like Scream 2's opening. It's almost like, it's like, how do we top the opening to the first Scream? They come pretty close. They didn't come too far off, I've got to say. It was an opening that was quite impactful. Now this is basically, I think this would be in second place actually for me. So I'm quite actually happy with the listing that I'm actually doing here, to be honest. The next film would actually be Halloween, which is kind of like the granddaddy of slasher films, released in 1978. The opening of Michael Myers, 6-year-old Michael Myers, killing his sister, Judith. It's just incredibly well made. It really is directed with a lot of finesse. Obviously, the entire scene is done POV. Now, it appears seamlessly, like there's no cuts, but there are actually cuts made, but they're seamlessly integrated with each other. It's very well made. And obviously, we get a point of view, going through the house into the kitchen. We actually see at first, Judith and her boyfriend sitting there snuggling, and they go upstairs and the lights go off. We don't need to see what's happening. We know what they've gone upstairs for. The lights go out. we know. And Myers, it's John Carpenter's very much putting all of his cards on the table, I think, with this whole scene. And it goes into the kitchen, and obviously a hand goes for the drawer and, grabs a knife. Again, this is all via POV. And, it was actually Deborah Hill's hands, actually, that actually picked up the knife, because she actually had small hands. And then, in what must be the shortest sex session in cinematic history, Judith's boyfriend comes downstairs. It's only probably been about a minute and a half, couple of minutes, if that. And we just get this person who, at this point in time, we don't know who they are. We don't actually know who they are. We hear the name Michael mentioned, but that's it. And, then obviously proceeding to go upstairs. And another particular moment I love is where the hand actually, sees the mask on the floor, and the hand actually picks up the mask. And then we actually it still carries on POV, but this time with the person wearing the mask. So we get the glimpse through the eye holes. And then obviously, Judith is sitting there, and she gets stabbed to death. All done via point of view. We get pretty much an entire tour of the house through this point of view, for Judith to be brutally stabbed. And then for the killer to actually make their way downstairs, open the door, and then we learn that this is young Michael Myers. And what I actually think is a really kind of... I'm struggling to think of the term here. It's a great little moment, because Myers is just kind of stood there, this blank, expressionless face, and his parents remove the mask, and he's just stood there, and then the camera pans far out. It just really sets up the tone of the film. It's a great opening, and in my opinion, it is probably the greatest opening to any slasher movie. And it's just a great moment. And well, that's basically in second place. As much as I love the opening to Halloween, there is one scene that is probably my favourite scene in any horror movie. Now, this isn't actually the opening, okay? This is a scene that takes place about just over a third of the way or so through the movie. And it's probably the most iconic scene in horror movie history, and it's probably just one of the most famous scenes in film history, full stop. And that's the shower scene in Psycho. Clearly, I think John Carpenter, obviously, Halloween is kind of an answer to Hitchcock's Psycho. One critic, I think it may have actually been Roger Ebert, actually said that basically Halloween, which, has a 91-minute runtime, is the shower scene from Psycho for a 91-minute extended runtime. Obviously John Carpenter casting Jamie Lee Curtis, as the final girl, if you will, as Laurie Strode, is just, again, a great kind of a great nod to Psycho, because, of course, her mother was Janet Leigh, the woman famously killed in the shower, Marion Crane. This must have been a hell of a shocking moment. I mean, genius, in my opinion, to what you believe is, the lead actress, the lead star in the film, and to have her killed off brutally, within just over a third of the way through the movie, was something that nobody saw coming. Talk about a gut punch. I mean, for when it was released in 1960. And again, I think Scream, in a way, pays homage, casting someone like Drew Barrymore, who's actually one of the biggest stars in that movie, and killed off 10 minutes or so in the film. Just genius. And the shower scene, I mean, it really needs no introduction. I mean, Bernard Herrmann's score just perfectly complements that scene. Originally, it was to be in silent. There wasn't going to be any music to accompany. I mean, it's hard to believe, because that music just fits it so perfectly. And this is the scene that actually had a lot of film studios not wanting to touch this film. Alfred Hitchcock was actually told, you can't do this. You can't do this. Hitchcock is one of the greatest film directors of all time. And, he was ruined. He was basically warned about he would ruin his reputation here as a filmmaker to put something like this in one of his movies. Psycho is a horror. It's a thriller slash horror. I don't categorize Psycho as a slasher movie. It certainly has some slasher elements to it. I certainly think it's kind of like the granddaddy of contemporary horror films. Yeah, for 1960, I mean, what's great about it is we don't actually see the knife penetrate the flesh. That wouldn't have been allowed. There's no way Hitchcock could have got away with that. It's left to the audience's imagination. We see the knife touching the flesh, but we don't actually see any stab wounds. We see no penetration. And, it's just an incredibly impactful scene. And obviously the blood was chocolate sauce. I mean, to me, Psycho works perfectly with black and white. The reason this movie was in black and white is because Hitchcock wanted to make the film for as cheap as possible. He had to fund much of this film himself, and he wanted to make this film for as cheap as possible, and it's cheaper to film in black and white because he'd already made quite a few colour films prior to this. Vertigo, North by Northwest, Rear Window, etc. But to me, black and white really adds to the film's atmosphere, really gives it that sense of creepiness. So to me, it's probably it is my favourite death scene in all of horror cinema, for the fact of how much of the risk that Hitchcock took. Now, I think that Hitchcock's wife had actually said to him, originally, I think Marion Crane was going to actually be in the film for a little longer. It was always the intention she'd be killed off. Because basically what Hitchcock did was take Robert Bloch's novel, released in 1959, and acquire all the rights. Every copy he could find was actually taken off shop shelves. The more people, the less people, that had read the book, the more of a success he found he was going to make with this, because he didn't want the twist to get out there. This could be a future podcast. Psycho's a film I absolutely adore. The shower scene from Psycho, just great. And as I said, one of the most iconic scenes in horror movie history that has been parodied God knows how many times. And Bernard Herrmann's score as well has actually been utilised in countless other things as well. It must be noted that Brian De Palma's 1976 Carrie actually utilises Hitchcock's Psycho, Bernard Herrmann's theme, should I say. That's it. They're basically the scenes I wanted to talk about. There are way more horror movie death scenes that I really do like. But these are the ones that really spring to mind when I kind of think of opening death scenes in horror movies. So that's it for today. Thanks to everyone that listened. If you like what you've heard, please feel free to subscribe. My channel is Talk and Stalk. It's completely devoted to horror. If you want some film reviews, TV reviews, and even Man United talks, podcasts, then my friend Matt does podcasts. His website is entertainmenttalk.org. And also a friend of mine, Dean Mallison, does stop motion videos and short horror films as well. He's worth checking out. That's Dean Mallison Films and Dean Mallison Stop Motion. That's Mallison. Thanks to everyone that listened, and take care, and I'll be back again soon to haunt you and torment you.